Former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo delivering the inaugural Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Annual Lecture at the ICC in Durban. We cross live now to that. He started a few minutes ago.
General, let me say that again. The Zulu forces out generally and out-soldiered the British Army camped at the foot of the Insandiwana mountain. The impi cried Uthuzu and urged forward in what was a battle for their most prized possession, the land of their forefathers. They delivered to the British one of the worst defeats in the history of their colonial expansion. I bring up this battle not only because it was a great victory for the Zulu people, but because the events of that day will foreshadow the century to come, with the spirit of the Zulu warriors being called on time and again. After the defeat of British Empire the British Empire took a more aggressive approach, deploying more soldiers and ending any hopes that King Setshwayo had of a negotiated peace. In the year that followed, the apartheid government will face this same fighting spirit and choosing to meet this spirit for freedom with bullets and violence, and for decades refused to pursue a negotiated settlement. At the time of this British invasion, Prince Buthelezi's grandfather, Nyamano Buthelezi, was Prime Minister to King Setshwayo, a role his father, Mathole, also provided to the Zulu royal family. It is through his mother, the daughter of King Dinusulu, Princess Magogo Kadisulu, that Chief Buthelezi called Pixeli Kasema his uncle. Through his mother, he had the spirit of the Zulu monarchy that fiercely fought British colonialism. And through his father, he had the spirit of selfless service to a cause of justice and human dignity. In addition, the spirit of a revolutionary can also be found in Prince Buthelezi. In 1912, his uncle, Pixeli Kaseme, became one of the founding fathers of the South African Native National Congress, SANNC, that gigantic fighter for freedom that will later become known as the African National Congress, ANC. His grandfather, King Dinusulu, was bestowed the greatest honor of being crowned the honorary president of the ANC. Distinguished guests, in the context of war and conflict, the first casualty is truth. These strong ties that Prince Buthelezi's family had with the ANC was a fact that will be forgotten in the 1980s and 1990s, especially by those who wished to drive a divisive narrative among the ranks of the oppressed people of South Africa. I bring up these family relations because these were the people who surrounded a young Prince Buthelezi in his formative years and who undoubtedly strengthened and shaped the man we have today. While it was an accident of birth that Prince Buthelezi found himself born into a family and community that was this illustrious, it also means that it was only natural that he would be counted among those who played a leading role in the struggle for the restoration of dignity for the people of Africa. I think we can all agree that Prince Buthelezi did not disappoint his forebears or their spirit of refusing to succumb to subjugation, and that he truly embodied their spirit throughout the various stages of his political life. It was at the University of Fort Hare, one of the bastions of African leadership, that Prince Buthelezi began to make his mark in history. Together with his comrades in the ANC Youth League, they were not disheartened by the 1948 electoral victory of the National Party and the implementation of the system of apartheid. If anything, they saw this as the most opportune time to agitate, mobilize, and organize under the clarion call of freedom in our lifetime. He rubbed shoulders with some of the giants from our continent, such as Dr. Z.K. Matthews, Mr. Robert Sobukwe, and former President Robert Mugabe. Meeting and interacting with such leaders could only have a positive impact on an individual, and must have provided a better education than one would receive in the halls of any university anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, due to his political activism, Prince Buthelezi was not able to complete his studies at Fort Hare. Through this action, Prince Buthelezi showed his commitment for putting the good of the people ahead of his own needs and a strong desire to right the wrongs of an oppressive system, despite it costing him his place at university. Even at a young age, Prince Buthelezi displayed a bravery that many people spend their whole lives searching for. Indeed, it can only be an act of bravery and uncommon commitment to jeopardize one's future to take such a strong moral stand. And in that act of bravery, Prince Buthelezi inspired others to follow in his footsteps. Prince Buthelezi's life was to be filled with moments of bravery. Following his expulsion from Fort Hare, Prince Buthelezi completed his studies at the non-European section of the University of Natal and was ultimately allowed to graduate at the University of Fort Hare. While in Durban, Prince Buthelezi had the honor of being mentored by Chief Albert Luthuli, Africa's first Nobel Peace Prize recipient, and a man who continues to command respect the world over. Prince Buthelezi also forged friendships with the stalwarts of the South African struggle, such as Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and Nelson Mandela, as he continued his political activities. Despite being engaged in political activism in Durban and preparing to undertake his legal articles, Prince Buthelezi was summoned to take on his hereditary position as Nkosi of the Buthelezi clan, which took him back to his home in Malabasini and away from Durban. Once again, the prince showed a willingness to make the sacrifices that were asked of him as a leader. The role and Nkosi ties one to the prosperity of the people who fall under the authority of that Nkosi. In spite of his young age, Prince Buthelezi rose to the occasion and assumed the role of a protector and an advocate for his people. To be an Nkosi is no small undertaking, and to be one during the dark days of apartheid and with a government that was hostile to the legitimacy of such a position made the responsibility much harder. But such daunting circumstances did not deter Prince Buthelezi from the obligations thrust upon him. Indeed, an easier path would have been to shirk these responsibilities in favor of furthering his professional aspirations in Durban. Prince Buthelezi, however, recognized the importance of traditional leadership structures, which needed to be preserved and cultivated. It would have been tempting to continue to protest against the apartheid government from the comfort of urban areas, where access to resources was far greater and the impact of action likely to be far larger. But if one was not prepared to preserve traditional mechanisms of leadership and use them as instruments of political transformation, then the centuries-long fight against colonialism and Western imperialism would have been in vain. By taking up the role of Nkosi, Prince Buthelezi was saying, I am an African and these are our ways. Distinguished guests, decades later, Prince Buthelezi was once more called upon to serve in another capacity as leader of the then KwaZulu homeland. Prince Buthelezi was elected by the Amakosi to lead what was, in essence, an attempt by the apartheid government to further drive a wedge within the oppressed peoples of South Africa and absolve itself of any obligation to care for the welfare of the majority of the population. Debates raged at the time about how best to handle apartheid's homeland system. Most of those who took up leadership positions in the homeland structure were branded as puppets of the apartheid regime, anti-revolutionaries, and enemies of progress. Accusations, I am sure, Prince Buthelezi had more than once. He was, at a stage, ostracized by the OAU. He was buffeted left, right, and center by the apartheid regime, the ANC, and the OAU. By creating the homelands along vague ethnic lines, the apartheid regime attempted to dilute any united black response to bring about effective change in South Africa. It cannot be denied that the position of Chief Executive Officer of the Zulu Territorial Authority was created by the apartheid government, which until then was alien to the Zulu people. Therefore, accepting this position must not be taken out of its historical context. I can imagine that many people have considered that serving as the leader of KwaZulu afforded Prince Buthelezi the opportunity to undermine the system of apartheid from within, and that he did. It was in the context of these trying times that the bonds of friendship were forged between myself and the Prince. I remember the day back in 1976, as though it was yesterday, when I hosted him in Nigeria. And let me just give the background to that historic visit to Nigeria. As I said earlier, AU has passed a resolution that we should have nothing to do with either Prince Buthelezi or Inkatha. As a responsible member of OAU, I had to, and as leader of Nigeria, we have to obey the resolution of AU. But at the same time, I wanted to have Prince Buthelezi in Nigeria. I couldn't directly and personally invite him, so I got to the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, which is a semi-autonomous government organization, to invite him to come and give a lecture. And he accepted to come. Of course, he could not come without paying me a courtesy call. And me receiving him paying me a courtesy call is not at my own invitation. So he came, he gave his lecture, and he acquitted himself at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. And then, of course, he called on me. And he made me to understand a lot more than met the eyes.
Well, we come out of that keynote address. Of course, that was former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo giving his keynote address at the inaugural Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Annual Lecture at the Nkosi Albert Luthuli ICC in Durban. Obasanjo is world-renowned, of course, for his peacekeeping efforts on the continent. And early on in his speech saying that whenever there is war, the first casualty is usually the truth.